Two things happened that morning that changed everything. First, I heard my daughter say something no mother should ever hear. Second, I realized silence can hurt louder than shouting. I was standing by the kitchen doorway, holding a tray of pancakes. The smell of butter filled the air, the kind of breakfast I used to make when Candace was a little girl. But now, she was leaning against the counter, phone pressed to her ear, laughing. Then I heard her say it. "I'm tired of babysitting a broke old woman." She wasn't whispering. She said it like it was normal. Like I was a burden. My hands went still. The tray slipped a little, and syrup ran down the side of the plate. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Was this the same daughter I stayed up all night for, when she had fevers? The same girl whose wedding dress I hand-sewed because we couldn't afford a designer one? Before I could speak, she noticed me standing there. Her face changed, guilt flashed, then annoyance. "Mom," she said sharply, "you weren't supposed to hear that." I set the tray on the table. My voice came out soft, almost calm. "Is that really how you see me?" Candace sighed, arms crossed. "Mom, don't make this a big thing. You've been staying here for months. You don't pay bills, you don't." I cut her off. "I don't what?" That's when she snapped. "If you don't want to go to the nursing home, go get a job." Just like that. No emotion, no hesitation. The word sliced straight through me. Not because of what she said, but because of how easily she said it. For a few seconds, the house was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator hum. The syrup dripped onto the floor. Her little boy, my grandson, peeked from behind the hallway, eyes wide. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just looked at her and smiled, the kind of smile you give when something inside you quietly breaks. Then I said, "You're right. Maybe it's time I stopped being a guest." Her face softened for half a second, maybe realizing what she'd done, but I didn't stay long enough to find out. I walked back to my room, every step feeling heavier than the last. That night, as I packed my small suitcase, I heard laughter from the living room, Candace and her husband watching TV. My laughter used to fill the same house. Now it sounded like someone else's home. I sat on the edge of the bed and whispered to myself. You raised her to be strong, but did you teach her to be kind? Have you ever given someone everything, only to realize they see you as nothing? Because that's the moment I understood, love doesn't always mean respect. I folded my husband's old sweater, the one that still smelled faintly of cedar and aftershave, and placed it on top of my clothes. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. When I turned off the lamp, the house felt smaller, colder. But deep inside, a strange calm began to grow. Like something sacred had finally been released. And as I closed my eyes, one question echoed louder than anything. What happens when a mother stops apologizing for existing? The next morning, sunlight crept through the blinds like it didn't know it was unwelcome. I moved slowly through the house, my house, though nothing in it felt like mine anymore. Candace's furniture filled the living room. Her paintings hung on the walls. Even the kitchen smelled different, like cinnamon instead of coffee. Every corner whispered, "You don't belong here anymore." I ran my hand across the dining table, the one my late husband, Leonard, built with his own hands. His fingerprints might still be in the wood. I remembered how proud he was of that table, how he said, "This will hold our family together." But the family broke long before the table did. When I reached the hallway, I stopped at the family photo wall. My picture was still there, but tucked behind newer frames, graduations, vacations, smiling faces where I was no longer invited. A strange thought crossed my mind. How do you disappear from your own life and not notice until it's too late? That night, while everyone slept, I went into the attic. Dust floated like tiny ghosts in the air. I was searching for something, though I didn't know what. And then, tucked inside an old shoebox, I found it, an unopened envelope with Leonard's handwriting on the front. The date was 6 months before he died. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter, simple, written in blue ink. It said, Gloria, if you're reading this, I'm gone. But don't let comfort become your prison. Promise me you'll keep living, not just surviving. I stared at the words until my tears blurred them. Leonard always knew how to say the one thing that would reach the deepest part of me. Downstairs, I could hear Candace talking in her sleep, restless. Maybe guilt, maybe nothing. I didn't know anymore. I folded the letter carefully and held it against my chest. For the first time in years, I felt him near, not as memory, but as reminder. That night, I made a decision I hadn't been brave enough to make in years. I was going to live again, even if it meant walking away from the only family I had left. Have you ever stood in a room full of people you love and realized you're invisible to them? If you've ever felt that, you'll understand what I did next. I placed the letter in my suitcase, zipped it shut, and whispered. All right, Leonard. I hear you. Outside, a car passed down the empty street. Its headlights swept across the window, a small, fleeting glow. I took it as a sign. Tomorrow, I'd walk out of that house and never look back. I woke up before the house did, like I always have. The light in my kitchen that morning felt different, thin, like someone had taken the warmth out of it. I moved on muscle memory, flip the griddle, butter the pan, crack the eggs. Cooking has been my way of saying I love you for 50 years. I still do it even when nobody notices. My grandson drifted in with his hoodie on backwards and earbuds in. He nodded at me the way you nod at a neighbor, not like you nod at someone who raised you. I said, "Good morning, Malik," and he barely looked up. I could hear the muffled beat of whatever was playing in his ears, and for a second I thought of how many lullabies I used to hum to him when he was small. That memory slipped past me like a ghost. Candace burst in, shoes clicking, phone glued to her palm. She was already on conference calls with work before breakfast even landed on the table. Darren, her husband, didn't look up from his screen. He was scrolling news, thumbs flicking like he was searching for something he cared about more than the room he shared with me. I set plates down like I always have, warm grits, eggs, bacon. Food arranged like an offering. I watched them eat and felt the hollow make its way through me. These are the people I stayed awake for, stitched costumes for school plays, signed permission slips, and sat through recitals. I knew every freckle and every worry. And yet that morning, they were almost strangers. Candace glanced up finally. "Mom, are you going to eat?" she said, irritation threading her voice. "You can't just sit and stare." I smiled. "I'm remembering," I said. She rolled her eyes. "Remembering what?" "Move on." That word, move, hit me in a place I didn't know was tender anymore. Move on. Like all the years I spent patching holes and paying late fees were nothing but a temporary stop on her way to somewhere important. When she left, the house felt big in a way that made my chest ache. I dried my hands and walked through rooms that used to hum with noise. Toys stacked in a corner, family photos that no longer included me in the front row, a TV showing the same sitcom we used to laugh at together. I stood in the doorway and took it in like a woman trying to memorize a room she'd be missing. I went to my room and opened the suitcase I'd set by the bed the night before. It felt strange to touch my things as if I were a visitor sorting through someone else's history. Each blouse I folded had a memory tucked in the hem, the blue one from graduation night, the floral dress from the picnic Leonard loved, the cardigan he bought me the winter before he died. Folding them felt a little like putting my life into neat boxes so I could carry it somewhere else. As I packed, the years played like a movie behind my eyes. Promotions I passed up so I could take a sick child to the doctor. Nights I worked 2 shifts just to keep the lights on. The time I gave up my own quiet dreams because somebody needed me to be present. I don't say that for pity, I'm not that woman, but the truth was settling on me like dust. I paused over a small framed photo of Leonard, that easy smile with the cigarette gone and a soft crease by his eyes. "You told me not to let comfort be a prison," I whispered. I could hear him say it like he'd said it on the porch at dawn. "Promise me you'll keep living, not just surviving." I placed the photo on top of the clothes. The weight of it felt like permission. Before I shut the suitcase, I wrote the tiniest note and left it tucked into my husband's Bible on the shelf. No accusations, no dramatic goodbyes, just a line: "I'm taking care of myself now." If anyone opened the Bible, they'd find that. If not, it would just be between him and me. I looked around that house with the kind of love that isn't loud. It doesn't demand to be seen. Still, I wanted them to know I was going. Maybe not for their sake, but for mine. I stood for a while, listening to the light hum of the refrigerator, the way the walls held echoes. It felt like the last breakfast I would make in that kitchen. When I closed the door behind me, I felt a strange lightness. For the first time in a long time, the thing I had been bending myself around, other people's comfort, wasn't holding me down. I walked out with my suitcase and a tiny, stubborn smile and felt something like relief settle behind my ribs. I walked because my legs needed to know the truth before my head did. The pavement was cool under my shoes, and the neighborhood still smelled like cut grass and lost promises. The driveways were lined with cars that gleamed and mailboxes that leaned the right way. I passed neighbors who waved because they always wave. Habit makes polite people out of everyone, but none of them stopped to ask where I was going. I didn't have an address in mind. I had $47 in my purse and a heart that had finally decided it wanted room to breathe. I sat on the bench at the corner bus stop and looked at my hands. They were lined in the way a life looks when it's been spent. I counted the bills like a woman counting truths, one small certainty after another. Maybe people think leaving is dramatic. Maybe they think the dramatic movies make sense of everything. But I was leaving because the slow grief of being invisible was louder than the fear of being alone. I wasn't running from love, I was stepping away from what had become convenient for other people. As the sun climbed, I felt the old shame wrap around me. I thought of Candace's face when she told me to get a job if I didn't want a nursing home. It wasn't just words, it was a verdict. I could almost hear her voice, clear as a bell: "If you don't want to go to the nursing home, go get a job." She said it like she was fixing a problem, like I was an appliance that needed replacing. Tears came hot and quick. Not of anger, although I felt that too, but of a grief that was raw and personal, the kind that comes when your usefulness is equated with your worth. I sat with that feeling until the bus schedule blurred at the edges. I thought, a few times, of going back. Of walking up the porch, telling them it was a mistake. How could I leave? But then I opened my hand and looked at the bills again. I remembered Leonard's letter and the way he had pressed his forehead to mine the last night and told me, quietly, to keep living. When the bus didn't arrive for a while, I started to worry about how ridiculous I must look, an older woman with a suitcase on a bench, waiting like she'd misplaced her life. Then a car rolled down the street, windows down, radio playing something country and soft. A man I recognized from the community food drive slowed his vehicle, nodded, and pulled over. "Gloria," he called, stepping out with a bag of bread tucked under his arm. His voice was like a hand on a cold shoulder, familiar and kind. "You all right?" Something in me wanted to say, "No, I am not all right. My daughter told me to get a job or go to a nursing home, and I am leaving the only house that remembers my husband's laugh." But I didn't say that. I shifted the suitcase a little closer and tried to keep my voice even. "I'm leaving," I said instead. He didn't look shocked. He only blinked, like he'd been expecting patience to crack someday and needed to know which way the pieces would fall. "You got somewhere to go?" "No," I said. "Not yet." He set his bag down and tilted his head. "Buses don't run for a while. How about some coffee? There's a diner on Main. You can think things over." I felt pride flare, stupid, old pride that had kept me polite all these years. "I don't want to be a burden," I said. "You wouldn't be," he answered simply. That was it. No sermon, no lecture. Just a chair and coffee and the offer. We walked to the diner together. He didn't ask me to explain why I left in the middle of the night. He didn't press me to choose. He just made sure the waitress brought a pot of hot water and asked what I liked in it. For the first time in a long while, I told someone the small, messy truth of how I felt, about being unseen, about wanting more than to be a fixture in other people's lives. As the conversation turned easy and ordinary, the suitcase at my feet felt less heavy. The world hadn't changed, but my place in it had. I could sit and decide whether to head to the shelter, a friend's spare room, or somewhere that let me start over with dignity. When we left the diner, the day felt different, less like an ending and more like the soft first page of a book. He shook my hand, said he'd be volunteering at the community food drive that weekend, and suggested I stop by. "We could use an eye like yours," he said. I filed the offer away, a small ember of possibility. I stood there for a moment and looked back the way we'd come, the street with the low porch lights, the house that smelled like last night's coffee and someone else's laughter. I thought of Candace's sharp words and then, like a bell in the distance, Leonard's handwriting calling me to live. Something inside me shifted and I looked forward again. I didn't have a map, but I had a direction. He told me his name was Henry Whitmore. There was something steady about the way he said it, like the name had roots. He looked to be in his early 60s, skin weathered by sun and work, hands rough in a way that spoke of things built and repaired. I remembered seeing him once or twice at the church food drive, handing out boxes with a kind of quiet focus. When he offered me a ride, I hesitated. My pride almost answered before my mouth did. But then I saw the look in his eyes, no pity, no curiosity, just the kind of kindness that doesn't need to explain itself. I nodded. "Thank you," I said softly. The moment I sat inside his old Navy sedan, I noticed the faint smell of cedar and coffee. The dashboard had small scuffs, the kind that only come from years of faithful use. A gospel station played low on the radio, the singer's voice rising and falling like prayer. He didn't ask where I came from right away. Instead, he asked, "You got somewhere to rest tonight?" I looked out the window. The streets passed in quiet blurs, neatly trimmed lawns, kids riding scooters, the smell of late morning rain. "Not yet," I admitted. I just needed to leave. He didn't press me. He just nodded, eyes still on the road. I know what that feels like. We drove for a while in silence. I wanted to fill it, to explain everything, but words felt too heavy. Finally, I said, "My daughter told me to get a job or go to a nursing home." His hand stayed steady on the wheel. "That's a hard thing to hear," he murmured. "She said it like it was nothing. Like I was a bill she was tired of paying." He didn't interrupt. He let me speak, and somehow that was more comforting than any advice could have been. I could hear myself unravel, years of quiet endurance spilling into that little car. She used to hold my hand when she was scared. Now she barely looks me in the eye, I said. He nodded slowly. People change when they forget where they came from. But that doesn't erase what you gave them. That line sat with me. The kind of truth that doesn't need decorating. We stopped at a red light. A little boy and his mother crossed in front of us. The boy's hand fit perfectly in hers, and the sight of it made my throat tighten. "I used to walk my girl to school just like that," I whispered. Henry glanced over gently. "You did your part, Gloria. You don't have to keep proving it." That was the first time I'd heard someone say my name that way in years, soft, steady, and full of respect. He offered to take me to a small community center he volunteered at, said they had rooms for women starting over. "It's not fancy," he said, "but the folks there will treat you like a person." I wanted to refuse, to say I'd manage, but something in his tone told me I could trust him. So I agreed. When we pulled up to the center, I noticed the paint peeling on the sign, the porch light flickering, and the scent of soup drifting from an open window. It wasn't much, but it felt alive. Before I stepped out, Henry said, "If you ever need someone to talk to, I'll be around." I lost my wife last spring. Still figuring out what life means after that. Our eyes met. Grief recognized grief. I smiled faintly. "Maybe we'll both figure it out," I said. He nodded, that quiet smile returning. "Maybe we will." And just like that, I realized, sometimes the people meant to help you heal don't arrive with fanfare or promises. They just show up at the gate when your whole life's packed in a suitcase. If you've ever met someone who showed you kindness when you least expected it, you know how powerful that moment can be. Tell me, have you ever had a stranger become the start of your second chance? The community center wasn't much to look at: peeling wallpaper, floors that creaked under your steps, and beds that squeaked when you turned. But there was warmth in the air, the kind that didn't have to be bought. The woman at the desk, Miss Thelma, handed me a key and said, "We don't have rules here, just respect. Supper's at 6. The kettle's always on." My room was small, but it had a window that faced the street, and a soft chair by the bed. I sat there for a long while, letting the quiet settle in. The clock ticked like a heartbeat, and for the first time in years, nobody called my name. I didn't have to answer to anyone. That kind of silence is heavy, but it's honest. That night, I walked to the kitchen. A few other women were gathered around a small table, laughing softly over stories of where they'd been. One woman, named Dolores, had left a husband who drained her savings. Another had escaped a home where she was never seen. We were all, in some way, refugees from love that turned indifferent. When I told them my daughter had asked me to leave, they didn't look shocked. Dolores only said, "Honey, sometimes your own blood is the first to forget your worth." Those words hit deep. Because it's true, when family stops seeing you, it feels like dying with your eyes open. I started helping around the kitchen the next morning. Habit, I guess. I scrubbed pots, organized shelves, and made soup like I used to make for my husband when times were lean. People began smiling when they saw me, calling me Miss Glow. It felt good, that little nickname. Henry dropped by a few times that week with supplies from the hardware store: light bulbs, nails, paint cans. He said he was fixing up the center's porch. Each time he came, he brought something small for me: a newspaper, an extra coffee, once even a jar of peach preserves he'd made himself. I'd sit with him on the steps while he worked, and we'd talk about nothing and everything. He told me about his late wife, Marjorie. About how they used to drive up to Lake Harmony just to watch the fog roll over the water. His voice softened every time he said her name, like he was touching something fragile. In return, I told him about Leonard, how he used to hum gospel songs when he was tired, how he always smelled like sawdust and aftershave. I hadn't spoken about Leonard out loud in years. It felt like breathing fresh air after holding it too long. Still, when night came, my daughter's voice echoed in my head: "If you don't want to go to the nursing home, go get a job." I'd stare at the ceiling and wonder, had I truly failed as a mother? Did love become weakness when it demanded nothing in return? Some nights, I'd whisper to the dark, "Did I raise her wrong, Leonard? Or did I just love her too much?" But the next morning, I'd get up anyway. I'd pour coffee for the new arrivals and tell them it was going to be all right, even when I wasn't sure it was true. That's the thing about women like me, we keep giving warmth, even when we're running low. One afternoon, Miss Thelma asked if I'd help organize donations for the weekend drive. That's when I saw Henry again, lifting crates into the back of his truck. He looked up and smiled like seeing me was the most natural thing in the world. "You settling in all right?" he asked. "I am," I said. "Feels strange being cared for." He laughed softly. "Maybe it's about time you let someone else do the caring." Those words stayed with me longer than I expected. That evening, after dinner, I stood by the window watching the sunset burn through the trees. The world outside was quiet, but inside me something had shifted. I was beginning to belong to myself again. And yet, there was a part of me that still longed for home, not the house, but the idea of being wanted there. The next morning, a letter arrived at the center with my name scrawled across the front, familiar handwriting I hadn't seen in years. I froze, the envelope trembling in my hands. Was it from Candace? Or someone else entirely? Henry came by the center that afternoon with a box of canned goods and a smile that could soften even the hardest day. I was in the kitchen when he walked in, sleeves rolled up, humming a tune I half recognized. It was something old, the kind of song people used to play when love was slow and patient. You again, I teased, pretending to frown. He grinned. Couldn't stay away from Miss Glow's famous soup. You flatterer, I said, handing him a cup of coffee. It's just beans and hope. He laughed, that deep, warm kind of laugh that feels like home. We sat by the window, the late sun spilling across the table, the smell of cinnamon rolls drifting from the oven. Outside, the world went on as usual, cars, children, wind, but inside that moment, time slowed. He looked at me after a long pause and asked, "What are you dreaming about these days?" It was such a simple question. But it hit me like thunder. I blinked. Dreaming? He nodded. Yeah. Something you want to do. Something that still makes you feel alive. I didn't know what to say. No one had asked me that in years. People asked about bills, errands, doctor appointments, but never about dreams. I stirred my coffee, watching the little swirl of steam rise. I used to love interior design, I said finally. Not professionally, just colors, furniture, spaces that tell stories. When Candace was little, I used to paint her room different shades every year. I wanted her world to feel full of color. Henry leaned forward, elbows on the table. You've got an eye for that, huh? Maybe I did once, I said. But then life got practical. Bills don't pay themselves. He smiled gently. You know, a friend of mine runs a small home restoration project over on Maple Street. Old houses, some are for veterans, some for seniors who can't afford repairs. They're looking for someone with good taste, someone who can see what a home could be. I froze. You mean, work? He nodded. Work, yes. But more than that, purpose. I think you'd be great at it. The words hung in the air like a fragile offering. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to say no. I wanted to say I don't know who I am anymore. Instead, I laughed softly. You don't even know if I can still hold a paintbrush. He looked straight into my eyes and said, You've been holding your whole world together, Gloria. That's harder than painting walls. Something inside me cracked, not from sadness, but from the shock of being seen. No one had believed in me like that since Leonard. I looked away, pretending to sip my coffee, blinking fast so he wouldn't notice the tears. Henry reached across the table, not touching, but close enough that I felt the warmth of his hand. Think about it, he said. You deserve a chance to build again. After he left, I sat in that quiet kitchen for a long time. The room still smelled like him, sawdust and rain and the faintest trace of aftershave. His words echoed, You deserve a chance to build again. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Pride whispered, You're too old. Fear whispered, You'll fail again. But somewhere deeper, another voice, small, gentle, whispered, Try again. I closed my eyes and let that voice win. Sometimes, the people who see your light the clearest are the ones who find you in your darkest season. Tell me in the comments, have you ever met someone who reminded you you're not done dreaming yet? The first thing I noticed about the old house on Maple Street was its bones, strong, even under the peeling paint. It was one of those turn-of-the-century homes with wraparound porches and windows that still remembered laughter. I showed up early that morning, nervous as a schoolgirl. Henry was already there, loading paint cans out of his truck. He handed me a brush with a smile. Let's bring her back to life. The smell of fresh paint filled the air, sharp but comforting. I rolled color over the faded walls, soft cream, pale green, hints of gold. As I worked, something inside me loosened. It felt good to create again, to see beauty return where neglect had lived. The project manager, a tall woman named Renee, stopped by to check my progress. She tilted her head, studying the wall I'd just finished. You've got an eye, Miss Gloria, she said. That color looks like sunlight if sunlight could rest. I laughed. Thank you. I used to love doing this. I forgot how good it feels to bring warmth back into a room. By lunchtime, my arms ached, my knees complained, but I didn't care. I felt alive, the kind of alive that doesn't depend on anyone's approval. I joined the others outside under a big oak tree. The workers passed around sandwiches and bottled water. I sat a few feet away, catching my breath. That's when I overheard them. Two men were talking by the truck. Their voices carried just enough for me to hear. "Shame about Henry's wife," one said. "Car accident 2 years ago. Drunk driver ran a light." The other shook his head. "Yeah. He was with her. Broke 3 ribs trying to pull her out. Folks said he hasn't really smiled since." I froze, the sandwich halfway to my mouth. I'd known Henry carried sadness, I saw it in the quiet behind his eyes. But hearing it put into words, it changed something. After they left, I sat there thinking about all the little signs, the way he looked out the window too long, the way he always carried himself like he was protecting something invisible. Grief recognizes grief. That's why we understood each other without needing to say much. When Henry walked up a few minutes later, his usual smile returning as he handed me a bottle of water, I saw him differently. Not as a rescuer, but as a man trying to heal by helping others heal too. "Everything okay?" he asked, noticing my silence. "Yeah," I said softly. "Just thinking how much work this house needs. But it's beautiful underneath." He smiled faintly. "Ain't that the truth about most things?" That afternoon, we painted side by side, barely talking, just sharing the rhythm of brushstrokes and the hum of old gospel music playing on a radio somewhere. At one point, our hands brushed when we both reached for the same roll of tape. Neither of us moved right away. His skin was warm, steady. For a second, I felt that old flutter I hadn't felt since before Leonard passed. It scared me, and comforted me. As the sun set, we stood in the doorway looking at the room we'd finished. The walls glowed in soft gold light. Henry whispered, almost to himself, "Marjorie would have loved this color." I turned to him, my heart tightening. "She must have had good taste." He chuckled quietly. "She did." Then he looked at me. "You remind me of her sometimes. Not in looks, in the way you see the world." That was the kind of compliment that doesn't just touch your heart, it roots there. When I walked back to the center that evening, my shoes dusty, my spirit light, I caught my reflection in a shop window. For the first time in years, I didn't see a tired widow. I saw a woman becoming herself again. Sometimes, healing doesn't come through talking, it comes through building something new, one brushstroke at a time. If you've ever started over, even when your heart was still mending, tell me, what helped you begin again? That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was haunted, but because I was hopeful. And that's a feeling I'd almost forgotten how to hold. I almost didn't open it. The envelope was thin, cream-colored, and looked official, the kind that usually carried bills or reminders of things I couldn't fix. But when I saw the sender's name, Montgomery Life Assurance, my breath caught. That was my late husband's old policy. I hadn't thought about it in years. I sat at the small kitchen table in the community center, the afternoon light pouring across the wood. My hands trembled as I slid my finger under the seal. Inside was a letter and a check, and something else I didn't expect. The letter read, "Dear Mrs. Whitfield, we are writing to confirm that the remaining balance from your late husband's policy is now available for release. Please note that a partial payout was made previously to the co-beneficiary, Ms. Candace Whitfield, per the terms of the original agreement." I reread the line 3 times, trying to make sense of it. Candace? Co-beneficiary? My daughter had received money from her father's policy, without ever telling me. I felt the room tilt slightly, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. When Leonard passed, we barely had enough to cover the funeral. Candace had insisted on handling the paperwork, said she'd take care of it so I wouldn't have to worry. I trusted her, because that's what mothers do. And now this letter told me that while I was sitting at home clipping coupons and skipping meals to save money for her kids' birthdays, she had already taken her share. Quietly. Comfortably. I pressed my palm against the table, the wood cool beneath my skin. For a long time, I didn't cry. I just sat there, staring at the page. It wasn't just about the money, it was what it meant. That my daughter, my only child, had seen me struggle and said nothing. That she'd taken what her father meant for both of us, and left me with the scraps. I whispered, "Lord, what did I do wrong?" I thought back to all those nights I stayed up sewing her school costumes, all those mornings I walked to work in the rain just to make sure she never missed lunch money. I thought about Leonard's last words to me, "Take care of her, Glow. She'll need your strength." But maybe it was me who needed saving all along. I folded the letter back into the envelope and tucked it into my purse. Henry stopped by that evening, bringing stew he'd made himself. "You okay?" he asked, noticing my silence. I forced a smile. "Just tired. Long day." He nodded slowly, not pressing. That's what I loved about him, he knew when silence was the safest place to rest. Later that night, when everyone had gone to bed, I took out the letter again. The check wasn't large, maybe enough to start over, rent a place, buy supplies. But I didn't feel joy. I felt grief all over again, not for my husband this time, but for the daughter I'd lost long before she ever said goodbye. I thought about calling her, confronting her, demanding to know why. But my heart was too raw, and my pride too tired. Instead, I whispered into the dark, "Not yet. I'll know when it's time." I slipped the check into my Bible, between the pages of Psalms, and turned out the light. Sometimes the deepest betrayals don't come from strangers, they come from the ones you built your world around. If you've ever been hurt by someone you'd have done anything for, tell me, did you ever find peace without an apology? When Henry invited me to the art fair, I almost said no. I'd been spending too much time inside my own thoughts lately, replaying the letter, the lie, the ache. But something about the way he asked, gentle, hopeful, made it hard to refuse. "Come on, Glow," he'd said. "You need some color in your day. It's Saturday. You can't let the world pass you by forever." So I agreed. That morning, I put on my soft blue dress, the one Leonard used to call my Sunday sky. I brushed my hair back, added a touch of lip gloss, and told my reflection, "You're still here. You're still you." The fair was small but lively, local artists, kids running with cotton candy, the smell of kettle corn floating in the air. Henry met me by the fountain, wearing his old brown hat and that same kind smile that always calmed me. "You look like sunshine," he said. I laughed. "And you look like trouble." We walked slowly between the booths, admiring the paintings and handmade crafts. One artist had painted a sunset over a quiet bay, the same kind of place Leonard used to dream of retiring to. I stood there for a long time, lost in the colors. Henry noticed. "You like it?" "I love it," I said softly. "It feels like peace." He smiled. "You deserve that, you know." Peace. We sat near a food stall, eating funnel cake, powdered sugar dusting our fingers. I hadn't felt that light-hearted in years. He asked about my family, and I hesitated, not wanting to let the bitterness of that letter leak into this fragile joy. "They're figuring things out," I said. He nodded, as if he understood without needing details. Then he did something unexpected, he reached for my hand. I froze, looking down at our fingers intertwined. My first instinct was to pull away, but I didn't. It felt right, simple, human, like two people holding each other steady in a storm. I looked up at him. "You always this bold, Mr. Whitmore?" "Only when I think it's worth the risk," he said with a wink. We laughed. And for a moment, I forgot the pain, the betrayal, the years I'd spent trying to prove my worth. I just felt alive, a woman again, not just a survivor. But then, across the street, something caught my eye. A familiar face. Candace. She was standing near a cafe, arguing with a man I recognized instantly, her husband, Derek. His voice was low, sharp. Her expression was tight, defensive. I couldn't hear their words, but the energy between them was loud enough. Henry followed my gaze. You okay? My chest tightened. That's my daughter. He turned. Want to go talk to her? I shook my head quickly. No. Not like this. Candace's hand shot up in frustration, her eyes flashing with anger. The man stormed off, leaving her standing there, wiping her face with the back of her hand. I felt the ground tilt beneath me again, just like when I read the letter. Maybe she was hurting too. Maybe she was breaking in her own ways. But the wound between us was still too fresh. Henry placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. You don't owe anyone your peace today, he said quietly. I nodded, swallowing hard. We walked away from the crowd, the laughter and music fading behind us. The sun dipped lower, casting everything in gold and shadow. I said softly, every time I think I'm done looking back, life turns me around again. Henry smiled sadly. That's because the past doesn't leave until it's heard. Maybe it's time to listen. That night, when I got home, I sat by the window watching the moonlight spill across my small room. The art fair, the laughter, the moment her face reappeared, it all felt like the universe was weaving something together I couldn't yet see. Maybe forgiveness. Maybe reckoning. Maybe both. Life has a way of testing your peace the moment you start to find it. If you were in my shoes, would you forgive or finally let go? Tell me in the comments. I really want to hear your heart. As I drifted to sleep, I whispered the same words Leonard once told me, peace isn't hiding from pain, glow. It's learning to breathe through it. And I knew the storm wasn't over yet. The rain started before dawn, soft at first, then angry. I was sitting by the window at the community center, sipping coffee, when my phone rang. The number on the screen froze me. Candace. I hadn't heard her voice in weeks. Not since that morning I walked away with my suitcase in silence. I hesitated, part of me wanting to ignore it. But old habits, motherly ones, die hard. Hello? All I heard was crying. Choked, panicked crying. Mom, please. I need you. My heart clenched. Candace? What's wrong? It's Derek, she sobbed. He's gone. He took the money, all of it. I don't know what to do. I can't pay rent, I can't, please, can you come? Her words tumbled over themselves, frantic, desperate. For a moment, I almost forgot everything she'd said to me. If you don't want to go to the nursing home, go get a job. Those words had lived rent-free in my chest for months. But pain has a strange memory, it forgets just enough when someone you love is crying. I'll come for a day, I said quietly. I could almost feel Henry's voice echoing in my mind, don't rush back into the fire, glow. But I had to see for myself. When I arrived, the house felt unfamiliar, like a place trying too hard to remember what warmth used to be. The walls were bare, some furniture was gone. Candace opened the door in an oversized sweater, eyes swollen and red. Thank God, she whispered, hugging me tightly. I didn't think you'd come. Her arms around me should have felt comforting. But something was missing. That deep mother-daughter connection, it felt replaced by a hollow need. I stepped inside, scanning the living room. Toys scattered. Bills on the counter. Silence where laughter used to be. You look tired, I said. I haven't slept. I can't eat. Derek took everything, the car, the account, even the kids' savings. I nodded slowly. Where are the children? At my friend's house. I didn't want them seeing me like this. We sat in the kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd once cooked her favorite Sunday breakfast. The air smelled like stale coffee and something burnt. She looked at me with trembling lips. Mom. I'm sorry. For everything I said. It was the kind of apology that sounds rehearsed, like a peace offering built out of guilt instead of truth. But I listened. I didn't mean it, she continued. I was angry, stressed. I didn't think you'd actually leave. Her voice cracked, and I reached across the table, taking her hand. I know you're hurting, baby. But sometimes, we don't realize what we destroy until it's gone. She burst into fresh tears. I need you. Please. I can't do this alone. And there it was, that word. Need. It wasn't love. It was dependency dressed up as affection. Still, I stayed. I helped her clean, cooked dinner, tried to bring life back into that cold house. But under it all, I sensed something else, tension. Fear. A secret humming beneath her trembling hands. That night, when she went to bed, I sat in the living room staring at the family photos on the wall. My late husband, Leonard, smiled from the frame. Candace was only 5 in that picture, missing her front teeth, grinning proudly in his arms. I whispered to the photo, "You'd hate seeing us like this." Outside, the rain hadn't stopped. It felt like a warning, steady, relentless. Have you ever gone back to a place you once called home, only to feel like a stranger there? That was me that night, surrounded by memories that no longer recognized me. As I turned off the lights and climbed into the guest bed, I didn't know it yet. But the storm that started outside was nothing compared to what I'd uncover the next morning. Morning light slipped through the blinds, cutting across the kitchen counter like quiet judgment. Candace was upstairs showering when I decided to make breakfast. I moved slowly, the way mothers do when they're trying not to intrude, cleaning crumbs, wiping the table, folding dish rags. I reached for the bread box to put away a loaf of rye, and that's when I saw it. An envelope. Slightly crumpled, tucked behind it like someone had hidden it in a hurry. At first, I thought it was just another bill. But when I pulled it out, my heart skipped. Montgomery Life Assurance. My breath caught. The same company. The same policy. I opened it slowly, my hands trembling, and the world seemed to tilt all over again. Inside were copies of the insurance forms. The exact ones I'd received weeks ago. Only these had my husband's handwriting. His signature beside mine. Except, there was one page missing. The withdrawal authorization. And then I saw it, the imprint on the next sheet, faint but visible if you tilted it under the light. The outline of a name written in blue ink. Candace Whitfield. I sank into the nearest chair. My chest burned, my pulse in my ears. She didn't just take the money. She forged the signature to get it. My daughter, the child I raised, protected, forgave, had stolen from her own mother long before she told me to go get a job. I heard the shower turn off upstairs. My fingers tightened around the envelope. For a moment, I considered putting it back, pretending I'd never seen it. It would have been easier to just walk away again. But truth, once seen, doesn't unsee itself. When Candace came down, she looked fragile, hair damp, eyes heavy. "You made coffee?" I nodded. "And I found something." She froze mid-step. "What do you mean?" I held up the envelope. This was behind the bread box. Color drained from her face. "Why would this be here, Candace?" I asked softly. She blinked rapidly, her mouth opening and closing without words. "Mom, it's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't mean to, I needed it. Derek had lost his job, the mortgage was behind, and you didn't understand what it was like for me." Her excuses poured out like water through cracks, fast, messy, uncontained. I stayed silent. "I was going to pay it back," she cried. "I swear, I thought you had enough. You always seemed fine." I looked at her then, really looked at her. Not the daughter I used to rock to sleep, not the teenager who once asked me to stay up late watching movies. This woman standing in front of me was scared, cornered, and hollowed out by guilt. "Candace," I whispered, "you took what your father left us. You lied to me. And then, you made me feel small for needing you." She sank to her knees, sobbing. "I'm sorry, Mom. Please." I was desperate. I felt tears sting my eyes too, but I didn't move toward her. Sometimes love isn't about rescuing, it's about letting someone see what they've broken. The silence between us was heavier than anger. Finally, I said, you didn't just steal money. You stole trust. And that's the one thing that's hardest to earn back. She looked up, her voice shaking. Do you hate me? I shook my head. No. But I pity you. Because you still think survival means betrayal. Her sobs quieted, replaced by quiet shame. I picked up my purse. I'm leaving in the morning. She whispered, please don't go. I already did once, I said softly. And maybe that was the first right thing I ever did for both of us. I stepped outside for air, my hands still trembling, the cool morning wind cutting through the ache. In that moment, I didn't feel victorious or righteous. I felt free, and hollow, all at once. If your own child betrayed your trust, could you still find room to forgive them? Or would walking away be the only piece left to take? As I walked down the familiar street toward the bus stop, the sun broke through the clouds. A single beam of light hit the pavement, guiding me forward. I didn't know what came next, only that I was done living in silence. And somewhere in the distance, I could almost hear Henry's voice again, you don't owe anyone your peace, glow. This time, I finally believed it. The sun was lowering when Henry's truck pulled into the driveway. I hadn't expected him. Truthfully, I hadn't expected anyone. The day had left me raw, the kind of tired that sits behind your ribs. I'd spent hours replaying Candace's tears, her denial, her silence afterward. I told myself I wouldn't cry this time. But when I saw Henry step out, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee, something inside me softened. Glow, he called gently, thought I'd find you here. I met him at the porch steps, trying to smile. You have a talent for showing up when I least expect it. He grinned. Guess I've always been bad at waiting. He handed me the coffee. It was still warm, light roast, the way I liked it. He remembered. We sat in silence for a while, the sky fading into the bruised colors of early evening. Cicadas hummed somewhere in the distance. I could smell the rain on his jacket. Finally, he said, the board at the center met this morning. Oh? They're starting a new project, designing small, independent spaces for elderly residents who don't want to live in homes. They want you to lead it. I blinked, unsure I'd heard right. Me? He nodded. You've already been doing half the work, planning layouts, decorating rooms, bringing life back into old walls. They just want to make it official. My throat tightened. Henry, I don't know what to say. Say yes, he replied with a small smile. I looked down at my coffee. The idea of it, of building again, creating something that mattered, lit something deep inside me. But another feeling tangled around it, guilt. Candace, I murmured. She's falling apart. I can't just leave. Henry turned to face me, his eyes steady. Needing you and using you aren't the same thing, Gloria. His words landed like truth finally spoken aloud. I stared at him, the world narrowing to that quiet porch and his weathered face, kind, familiar, and patient. Before I could answer, he reached into his jacket pocket. There's something else, he said softly. He pulled out a small, wooden box. No velvet, no flash. Just a simple box, worn smooth at the edges. Now don't panic, he chuckled. It's not the kind of proposal you think. He opened it. Inside was a silver ring, simple, elegant, not new. This was my wife's, he said. She told me once that when I was ready to love again, I should pass it forward, not as a replacement, but as a reminder. I stared at him, speechless. Gloria, he said, voice steady but soft, we've both walked through enough fire to know peace doesn't come easy. I don't want to rush you. I just want to share what's left of life, the quiet mornings, the laughter, the long walks by the sea. Not to fix you, not to fill a space. Just to walk beside you. Tears blurred my vision. Henry, He raised a hand gently. You don't have to say yes. I just needed you to know I mean this. You deserve something gentle after all that noise. We sat in silence for what felt like forever. The sun dipped behind the trees, throwing gold light over the porch. I looked at that ring, the reflection of something lost, now offered as something new. I don't know if I can, I whispered. My heart still feels divided. He nodded. Then let it be divided. But let it beat for you this time. That line, so simple, so patient, unraveled something inside me. I took his hand, feeling the roughness of years, the warmth of someone who understood the quiet pain of survival. I can't promise anything, I said. Then promise to try, he replied. And for the first time in a long while, I smiled, not out of politeness or gratitude, but from a small, trembling place of hope. Have you ever met someone who didn't try to fix your scars, just held them like they mattered? That's what Henry did for me that evening. When he left, he didn't press me for an answer. He just said, "You know where to find me." As his truck disappeared down the road, I stood there, clutching the coffee cup, realizing I was standing on the edge of something new. Not youth, not romance, but peace. The next morning, the air felt heavier, like the calm before a storm that already knows where it's going to hit. I was folding laundry when I heard the crunch of tires outside. Henry's truck again. Candace was by the window. "Who's that?" she asked sharply. "Henry," I said quietly. Her eyebrows shot up. "He's here? You invited him?" I hesitated. "He came by yesterday." The tone in her voice shifted, sharp, almost mocking. "Wow. You move fast." "Candace," I sighed, "please don't start." But she already had. "So that's it, huh? You find some lonely old man, and now you're acting like everything's fine? Like you're some kind of project manager?" Her words stung, not because of the insult, but because of the bitterness underneath. "I'm trying to rebuild, baby," I said softly. "That's all." "Rebuild?" she snapped. "With him? You barely know him." "I know kindness when I see it." She laughed bitterly. "Kindness? Or convenience? Don't pretend you're not trying to prove something, acting like you've got it all figured out while your daughter's life is falling apart." The argument spilled out fast, ugly, raw. "Candace," I said, "this isn't about me choosing him over you." "Oh, please. Everything's about you now. You're dressing nicer, smiling more, talking about work like you're 20 again." Her voice cracked. "What happened to helping me? To us?" I felt a sharp ache in my chest. "What happened is you stopped wanting help, you wanted control." Her face twisted, anger flashing. "If you don't want to go to a nursing home, then go get a job." The line. The same cruel echo. The one that broke me months ago. But this time, it didn't hurt. It just confirmed what I already knew. I stared at her, really looked at her, and for once, I didn't see my child. I saw a grown woman who hadn't yet faced her own reflection. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just smiled. Then, quietly, I turned and walked to my room. I pulled out my old suitcase from under the bed, the same one that had carried my grief, my memories, and my slow resurrection. Candace followed me to the doorway, still shouting. "So that's it? You're running away again?" "No," I said calmly, folding my clothes. "I'm finally walking toward something." She blinked. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I love you, Candace," I said, zipping up the bag. "But love isn't slavery. And guilt isn't family." She stared, speechless. I walked past her, down the hall that had once been filled with our laughter. The memories didn't haunt me this time, they blessed me on the way out. At the door, I set the key on the table. "Mom," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Don't go." I turned back and smiled sadly. "One day, you'll understand why I had to." Outside, the air was cool. The sun had dipped behind the clouds, but the light felt different, freer. Henry was leaning against his truck, concern written across his face. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I nodded, tears slipping down my cheeks, not from sadness, but relief. "I think," I said, "I finally am." Have you ever reached that point where the pain stops controlling you, where you finally choose peace over permission? That was my moment. Henry opened the truck door for me. As I climbed in, I looked back at the house one last time. The curtains fluttered in the window, maybe from the wind, maybe from her watching. Either way, I didn't wave. Some goodbyes are better said in silence. The evening air had that honey-colored glow that only comes after a storm, soft, forgiving, golden. My small suitcase rolled quietly behind me, its wheels clicking against the gravel like a soft heartbeat. Each step away from that house felt lighter, steadier, like the ground was finally giving me permission to exist. I didn't rush. I wanted to remember this, the scent of cut grass, the hush of the wind through the trees, the way the sunlight spilled over the fence I once painted with my late husband's hands beside mine. And then, from the distance, I heard it, the low hum of an engine. A car turned slowly onto the street. Not just any car, a black sedan, polished but modest. I stopped walking, my hand tightening around the suitcase handle. The car pulled to a stop in front of the gate. The door opened, and out stepped Henry, dressed simply, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. Not roses, not lilies, just wildflowers, the kind that grow without anyone telling them where they belong. He smiled when he saw me. "I figured you'd need a ride," he said softly. I stood there, frozen for a moment, then smiled back. "You figured right." From the window behind me, I saw movement, Candace, peering out. Her face pale, her eyes wide, confusion etched into every line. She pushed open the door and stepped outside, her voice sharp, uncertain. "Mom? Who is that?" Henry turned slightly, polite as always, but I could see the flicker of recognition cross her face. She gasped. You're the donor from the community fundraiser. The one who?" Henry nodded gently. "We've met before, yes." Her face flushed, shame and disbelief battling behind her eyes. I turned to her, the distance between us finally clear, not measured in feet, but in understanding. "Take care of yourself, Candace," I said quietly. "I already have." For a second, she looked like a little girl again, eyes trembling, lips parting like she wanted to say don't go. But she didn't. And I didn't wait. I walked toward the car, each step releasing a lifetime of weight I didn't even know I carried. Henry took the suitcase from my hand, placed it gently in the trunk, and opened the passenger door for me. As I slid into the seat, the leather felt warm, not luxurious, not new, just safe. The door closed softly behind me, sealing in a peace I hadn't felt in years. Through the window, I saw Candace still standing there, her hands clutching the porch rail. The wind caught her hair, the way it used to when she was small, and ran through the yard calling my name. For a heartbeat, I wanted to step out, to say one more thing, maybe I forgive you, maybe I understand. But I realized forgiveness doesn't always need witnesses. Sometimes it's enough to whisper it inside your own heart and move forward. Henry started the engine. The hum was steady, grounding. The car rolled slowly down the street, that quiet suburban street that had seen my beginnings and my endings. The sun dipped lower, painting the houses gold and crimson, and I watched them fade in the side mirror, smaller and smaller until they were just shapes, then shadows, then nothing at all. Henry glanced over. "You okay?" I nodded. I finally am." He smiled. "Good. You deserve a little peace." I turned to him, the corners of my mouth lifting. Peace took its time finding me. He chuckled. "It always does." For a while, we drove in silence, that kind of silence that doesn't ache, it heals. The air smelled faintly of his cologne, the wildflowers resting in my lap. Out the window, the world looked different, wider somehow, like the horizon had decided to stretch just for me. As the town faded behind us, I thought about everything I'd left, and everything I'd gained. I'd lost my husband, my sense of home, my daughter's trust, but somewhere along the way, I found myself. The woman I used to be, the one who apologized for taking up space, was gone. In her place was someone quieter, but stronger. Someone who finally understood that love doesn't mean shrinking to fit inside someone else's comfort. I looked at Henry, his hand steady on the wheel, and smiled softly. He glanced at me, half smiling. "What's on your mind?" "Just thinking," I said, "how strange it is to start over at 58. He laughed lightly. "Strange, maybe. But not impossible." "No," I said, looking out at the open road ahead, "not impossible at all." The sky deepened into twilight. Streetlights blinked on one by one, tiny beacons guiding the way. I thought of my husband's letter again, "Don't let comfort become your prison." He was right. I had mistaken survival for comfort, endurance for peace. But now I understood what he meant. Peace isn't staying where you're tolerated. It's walking away, even with shaking hands, and trusting that love will find you again in a gentler form. The car curved toward the highway, the city lights twinkling ahead. I rested my head against the seat and closed my eyes. For the first time, I didn't see loss. I saw beginnings. And maybe that's what healing really is, not forgetting the pain, but learning to live beautifully after it. If you've ever walked away from a place that no longer felt like home, if you've ever had to choose yourself after being forgotten, then you know exactly what this moment feels like. It's not selfish. It's sacred. The kind of peace you earn through tears, prayer, and long nights of asking why me. But one day, you wake up and realize, it was never punishment. It was preparation. And that's when life begins again. If Gloria's story touched your heart, tell me in the comments, would you have walked away, or stayed for one more chance? And if you believe, like I do, that it's never too late to start over, make sure you subscribe to Voices of Aunty Mae. Because every day, we share stories that remind us, you can lose everything, and still find yourself again.